The 1990 World Championship was decided in dramatic and controversial circumstances, when Ayrton Senna went for a gap that didn't exist and took out Alain Prost at the start of the Japanese Grand Prix. What many people don't remember though is that there was actually still one race to go in the World Championship after this, one final hurrah to end an exciting and historic season of Formula 1. This race would be held on the streets of Adelaide, and although both World Championships had already been decided, there was still a lot of intrigue as some drivers prepared to move teams or improve on the championship positions. Champion-elect Ayrton Senna started on pole position with a scintillating lap that put him over half a second clear of his teammate Gerhard Berger and the rest of the field. The Ferraris of Nigel Mansell and Alain Prost were 3rd and 4th, and Jean Alesi was best of the rest in 5th in his Tyrrell. Michele Alboreto finished an awful season by failing to qualify for Arrows, as he was knocked out of the starting grid by Gabriele Tarquini, who actually made it for once. Also failing to qualify were Yannick Dalmas, Alex Caffey and Bertrand Gachot, meaning the awful Coloni team had tried and failed to qualify for every single Grand Prix that year. Take that, people who say that F1 teams used to be so much more competitive back in the olden days. All eyes before the start were on Alain Prost, who is generally considered to be falling out of love with the sport after recent events, and who had been warned after walking out of the driver's briefing. Some were wondering whether there was a chance he would take Senna out at the start in retaliation, or whether this would be his last Grand Prix. When the race began, Prost darted out but immediately got stuck behind his teammate, who bogged down on an upshift. Senna led into turn 1, and amazingly everyone made the first 2 corners within the white lines and in one piece. Nelson Piquet moved up to 5th past Alesi into turn 4, and Senna immediately started pulling away out in front. Suddenly Berger had a problem, slowing dramatically and allowing Mansell to take 2nd. It seemed to fix itself almost immediately though, so whatever I guess, on with the race. Here you see the view on board with Prost as he now chases Berger for 3rd. Incidentally, this race is set to get more and more difficult for the Ferrari drivers as it goes on, as it's hot in Australia and the Ferrari team elected to run without onboard drinks as the track was too bumpy for the drink system to work properly. Oof. One way to make an already angry driver even more fiery is to take away his drinks, just ask Kimi. One thing that no one had taken into consideration was the speed of the Benetton cars down the straight. Look at Piquet taking Prost on lap 3. Also, Patrese there had got past Alesi by this point, and Boutsen was behind him trying to follow him through. Skipping forward a little bit, look at this as Piquet makes a move on Berger for 3rd. This race was very much expected to be a McLaren versus Ferrari affair, but Piquet was rejuvenated at this stage of his career. After all, when Senna and Prost had crashed at the previous Grand Prix, it was Piquet who had picked up the spoils to win. Also, that graphic at the bottom of the screen is not a 1990s style F1 car. Sorry for nitpicking. Up in front, Senna actually hadn't been able to get away as much as it initially looked like he would, and it was actually quite close. The challenger here was Nigel Mansell, who by this stage knew that he was leaving Ferrari, and who would play a much bigger part in the story of the 1991 season behind the wheel of a Williams. He'd had 3 wins for Ferrari, but he was gunning for a 4th. A notable team on the grid for this Grand Prix was Osella, who you see fielding Olivier Griard in the black and orange car just up the road from Senna. Osella had only fielded 1 car throughout 1990, and Griard had done well to qualify them for their last Grand Prix before they were sold to Gabriele Rumi's Fonmetal brand for the following season. The Osella name left F1 with a grand total of 5 points from 11 seasons. Not great, but a gold star for effort. Amazingly, none of the 26 drivers in this race were competing in their last Grand Prix, as even those who didn't get a seat for 1991 returned for future races. That's rare for a season finale. Suddenly, everyone found themselves looking upwards as Nicola Larini found himself flying through the air. That is a notoriously dangerous curb, and Larini was lucky to get away without having a huge accident. Amazingly, he was able to continue in the race, although I bet his back was sore. It amazes me that the race organisers could see an incident like that and not realise how dangerous that curb was. Maybe if they had done, Mika Hakkinen wouldn't have had his horrendous crash 5 years later. Talking of incidents, off goes the only Australian in the race. David Brabham was forced to retire after this spin at turn 1, and luckily Patrese avoided the same fate despite almost smashing into Gianni Morbidelli. Also there's Andrea De Cesaris having his 1000th retirement, which is impressive since this was the 500th World Championship Grand Prix. Here's another lucky miss as Mauricio Gugelmin slides out of the race with a braking issue. I say lucky because even though he was out of the race, a braking issue at a straight circuit is very dangerous and could have led to a far larger accident. As it is, he stopped just short of the barriers and climbed out unscathed. Also out of the race by this stage were Aguri Suzuki, Gianni Morbidelli and Eric Bernard, who had all had mechanical issues off-screen. Unfortunately, after his strong qualifying performance, Jean Alesi had been dropping back and struggling, and here he had a spin. You'll soon see Senna and Mansell coming through to lap him, leaving Jean like, "Oh well, I'll see you later." He was now well and truly out of the points, with the Williamses having climbed up to 6th and 7th. Suddenly, Senna was on his own as Mansell went down an escape road and had to spin to rejoin. Nigel now found himself with his old rival Piquet on his tail, and with the Benetton straight line speed, keeping him back was going to be an issue. Here we go then, Piquet darts out on the main straight, and Nigel struggles for grip as the Brazilian takes second. Now watch as Berger makes a mistake and loses 4th place to Prost. That was a weird one, but I think it was caused by Gerhard putting his wheels on the curb under braking, just like Larini did earlier. Here you see a replay, and yes indeed, whoopsie daisy, and the Ferraris are 3rd and 4th as Berger's lucky not to take flight. Someone who wasn't quite so lucky was Satoru Nakajima, whose brakes failed and forced him out of the race and onto my crunch count. It seems that there were quite a few braking issues going on in this race, and I don't just mean broken cars. If I was one of these drivers, I'd be getting quite worried about now, and maybe lifting off a bit sooner than necessary in the braking zones. Adelaide really bites. You may notice now that Mansell is behind Berger, and that's because he's made a pit stop, presumably for fresh tyres after his spin. That means the order is now Senna, Piquet, Prost, Berger, Mansell and Boutsen in the top 6, but with Mansell on fresh tyres, Berger's got a job to hold him back. Well, that didn't last long, did it?
Griard once again being a problem.
Oh, James, you have a way with words. Suddenly, the race was turned on its head as Senna was spotted walking away from the circuit, with the notable absence being his car. Where had he left it? Well, as it turns out, stuffed into the barriers. The brakes had failed on his McLaren in exactly the same way that Nakajima's had, and Ayrton made it no further. He was out of the race, and fellow Brazilian Nelson Piquet inherited the lead in a race where McLaren was supposed to be dominant. After all that chaos, here's Piquet's teammate Roberto Moreno being lapped, highlighting the unfortunate disparity in skill between the two. In his commentary, James Hunt had spent the majority of the race talking up Roberto and saying how great he was compared to Thierry Boutsen, the driver who almost got the Benetton seat after Alessandro Nannini's helicopter crash. However, races like these show the exact opposite in my opinion. In this instance, Moreno is running 7th in a car that his teammate is using to lead the race, and Boutsen is running 5th and beating his own teammate Patrese, a proven and experienced racer. I've got to say, I very much disagree with James sometimes, and this is one of those instances. Also, that broken car you can see in the background there, covered in fire extinguishing, is the AGS of Gabriele Tarquini, which had broken down in a very spooky way, and of course was just left there at the side of the road, because this is the 1980s. They didn't care that it was barely off the road on the fastest part of the course. What are you, a wuss? Anyway, remember these guys? The Ferraris were 2nd and 3rd at this point, and Mansell had been smashing the lap record over and over again ever since his pit stop. With Piquet about 10 seconds up the road, Mansell had a clear track ahead of him as he passed Prost up the inside and took 2nd place in his last race for Ferrari. After that, he set another lap record and took 2 seconds out of Piquet's lead. The gap was coming down as Mansell closed like a hunter on the prowl. I'll tell you what, when they nicknamed him Il Leone, they weren't lying. Now this is interesting. Watch in the background in a second as a car appears from well into the runoff area. That's Piquet recovering from an off, and suddenly Mansell is on his tail. The race for the lead is on in Adelaide with just 5 laps to go. Here's Prost nicely demonstrating for us what Piquet just did. Onto the last lap, you can see here that Mansell had a problem. The Benetton was just too fast on the straights. The dirty air from behind Piquet's car completely stalled Mansell's progress, and on top of that, Nelson defended well. Nigel's last chance was down at the hairpin when he got a double slipstream from Piquet and the lapped car of Stefano Modena, but the door closed and Mansell looked up in avoidance. Whoa! What a fantastically exciting finish, and what a great Grand Prix! I'm so glad they didn't collide on the last lap, because that would have put a real sour taste on it all. Nelson Piquet came home to take a well-deserved win, and Mansell came home second to pick up one last Ferrari podium. Prost came home third to give Ferrari a double podium, and the other cars in the points were Berger, Boutsen and Patrese. Impressively, 13 cars were classified, which is actually quite a lot for a Grand Prix at Adelaide. Guys, before I give this race a score, I want to let you know that I have a Daily Motion account for all the races that get taken down from my YouTube channel by the pesky FOM bots. Due to the high levels of parody, review and education my videos contain, as well as the short lengths of the clips I use, I believe that all of my videos fall under fair use, but sadly this isn't always enough. On my Daily Motion account, you can find the 1996 Monaco and Portuguese Grand Prix, as well as any other video that may end up being taken down from my YouTube channel. The link is in the description. Thank you. I gave the Grand Prix a 6.7 out of 10 overall, which I feel was brought down quite a lot by the lack of championship implications. Sure, Piquet snatched third in the championship from Berger, but no one cares about that at the final round of the season. We wanted to see a title decider. Oh well. I gave it a bonus point of +1 for that final lap, as a great way to make a race stick in people's memories is to end it with a bang. Not literally, of course, as Mansell's avoidance skills came to the fore. I'll give the Driver of the Day award for Best Driver to Piquet, who won on a day that really should have belonged to either McLaren or Ferrari. I'll give the Onui Trophy for Worst Driver to Roberto Moreno, who finished 7th and a lap down in the other Benetton. Drive safety guys, and I'll see you next time.